the Art of Bulgari, La Dolce Vita and Beyond, which I can see that you're all quite interested in. Very glad to see you here this evening. And I'm the curator of European Decorative Arts at the Legion of Honor. My name's Martin Chapman. And I'm here to introduce our speaker this evening, Amanda Triossi. Amanda is really the powerhouse behind all that goes on with Bulgari in the heritage department. She's consultant to the heritage collection. She really formed the heritage collection. And the marvelous pieces of jewelry that you'll see upstairs are largely the result of Amanda's research and diligence. She's also the great historian for Bulgari, and she is the one who we have depended on so much for much of what we've got in the exhibition. She has co-curated this with me. In fact, she's really been the curator. I've just been tagging along. And she has also written the lion's share of the catalogue. Amanda was Italian, but you'd hardly know it, because she speaks English like I do, and but because she was educated at Cambridge and has also worked with Sotheby's. So from her days in England, she has moved out into the field of jewelry history, and she's really an expert on the history of jewelry and jewelry design, to the extent that she ran a course with Sotheby's on jewelry for the Works of Art course in London. Really, from 1996, she published the first monograph on Bulgari, and there have been several books that Amanda has written on this subject, and she's also curated exhibitions around the world on Bulgari, in Paris and in China, and has really been, as I said at the beginning, the powerhouse behind this project that we have here, which is opening tomorrow to the public. So I've really enjoyed working with Amanda. She knows so much about Bulgari, and she can really put it into marvelous context, as well as the detail of the individual jewels. So please join me in welcoming Amanda Triossi.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's with great pleasure for me to be here in San Francisco for this first ever Bulgari retrospective in the United States, and to have the opportunity to speak to you tonight of the art of Bulgari from La Dolce Vita and beyond. Now, during this talk, I would like to illustrate Bulgari's achievement in the world of jewelry design, and showing you a few of the many magnificent jewels on exhibition here at the De Young Museum. Now, although Bulgari's history goes back 130 years, my talk and the exhibition focuses on a more limited period of time. 4 decades of creativity, namely from the 1950s to the end of the 1980s. The reason for focusing primarily on this period is that it was during this time that the company began to forge and develop its very distinctive and recognizable style. Now, for those who are not familiar with Bulgari, its history, as mentioned, goes back more than a century, when the founder Sotiris Bulgaris, who you see on the screen, later Italianized his name to Sotirio Bulgari, was the grandfather of the current president and vice president of the company, left his native Greece and settled in Rome, opening the first store in 1884. Now, his business prospered rapidly, And this enabled him to open in a very relative short period of time, approximately 15 years, 2 more shops in Rome, a number of subsidiaries in Italy, Naples, Sorrento, Sanremo, Bellagio, as well as seasonal resorts abroad in Switzerland, in St. Moritz and Lucerne. And you can see some of them listed on this advertisement, or dated around 1905. Now, at Sotirio's death in 1932, he was succeeded by his 2 sons, which you can see pictured here at the back, Giorgio and Costantino. The first, Giorgio, was a great jewelry connoisseur, and the latter a silver specialist who published the first and still comprehensive work on Italian silver and jewelry makers' marks. At the beginning of the 1970s, the 3rd generation of Bulgari took over the company, led by Giorgio's 3 sons, that you again see here, Paolo, Nicola, and Gianni. Gianni, the latter, he would leave the company in 1987. Now, from 1984, the nephew of the 3 brothers, Francesco Trapani, the young gentleman in the center, became the CEO of the company, with his uncles Paolo and Nicola Bulgari acting respectively as president and vice president. It is Francesco Trapani's pride, not only in having led Bulgari, initially a family-run business, to become a world luxury brand, but also to have been born 100 years practically to the day after his great-grandfather, Sotirio, the founder of Bulgari. In 2011, Bulgari became part of the LVMH luxury group. Nonetheless, the Bulgari family continues to be involved actively within the group. Paolo and Nicola Bulgari continue in their roles as president and vice president of Bulgari, and Francesco Trapani as CEO of the entire jewelry and watch division of the LVMH group. Now, surprisingly, in the early days, one would not find precious jewelry at Bulgari, as Sotirio manufactured and sold silverware. And this was very much following in the footsteps of his family tradition. Sotirio's father and his grandfather had been skilled silversmiths, as well as his ancestors, who came from a small village in Epirus, and that is a region in northern Greece bordering Albania, and they had all been involved in the silver trade and making silver. Now, throughout his extensive network of shops, Sotirio sold silver artifacts, as you can see here, of Greek tradition, as well as antiques. Now, it was only around 1915 when Sotirio began to diversify his stock by introducing precious jewels, which was soon going to replace his silver artifacts. Now, this clearly required a substantial capital and a concentration of resources, which led Sotirio to focus his activity in only one outlet, the Via dei Condotti number 10 store, which you see here, and which is still the current flagship store of Bulgari worldwide. Gradually, he began to relinquish his other shops, leaving them to relatives or associates from Greece. Now, although documentation, unfortunately, at this time is very scarce, the photograph that I'm showing you of the shop front of Bulgari number 10 Via Condotti in the 1920s provides evidence of the greater emphasis placed on precious jewels, which dominate the entire showcase at the center. Now, from a stylistic point of view, the jewels created and sold at Bulgari from the 1920s up until the 1950s, although of fine quality and high intrinsic value, are not particularly recognizable from a design point of view, as they follow very closely the fashionable international trends led by Parisian jewelers. So, as I show you here, in the 1920s, Bulgari created fine Art Deco jewels of linear design, such as long earrings, which were universally in vogue at this time, as they complemented beautifully the 1920s fashionable bob haircut. Likewise, in the 1930s, bold diamond-set jewels formed of geometrical motifs were much in vogue at the time. And it was in particular wide bracelets which were worn in stacks. And it's not surprising that Bulgari created a great number of them, as you can see on the screen. Now, in the 1940s, a typical feature of the jewels is that they were no longer mounted in platinum and diamonds, but in yellow gold, with jewels or gems used very sparingly. Now, this was not unique to Bulgari, but it was a universal feature, and this was obviously caused by the war. Platinum, in fact, had been requisitioned in most countries for the armament industry, so jewelers were obliged to avail themselves of gold and make do with a much more scarce supply of precious gems. Now, with the end of the war and the beginning of a new decade is where our story begins. It is the time often referred to as la dolce vita. In Italian, literally the sweet life, a period that spans roughly from the mid-50s to the early 60s. A period after post-war recovery and increasing economic prosperity, Rome became the center of the international film industry. However, the term dolce vita nowadays has become part of common vocabulary and seems to be applied rather loosely to a variety of situations that are not strictly related to Rome in the 1950s. It is used in reference to food and eateries in Italy and abroad, as well as hotels and B&Bs, nightclubs, and as I was to discover before boarding my flight to San Francisco, Dolce Vita is even the name given to airport lounges. Now, strictly speaking, however, the term derives from the title of the 1961 film by Italian film director Federico Fellini, starring Marcello Mastroianni and Anita Ekberg, which interestingly does not depict a rosy, sweet life in Rome in those days, but rather is a critique of the emptiness and lack of values of a certain circle of Roman society at the time, populated by foreigners, aristocrats, actors, hangers-on, Mr. Nobodies, as well as reporters, one of whom in the film goes by the surname of Paparazzo. Now, surprisingly, this name has stuck to the point that today we all refer to intrusive photo reporters as paparazzi. But for Bulgari, however, the period of la dolce vita may be viewed indeed as the sweet life. Giorgio, who you see here seated in the Bulgari store, and Costantino, who had taken control of the business in 1932 at their father's death, had managed to prosper to a degree even during the war, and at the beginning of the 1950s were poised to meet new challenges and to seize new business opportunities offered to them as Rome became the Hollywood on the Tiber. Now, given the high level of jewels and gems at Bulgari at the time, and the strategic position of Bulgari's one and only store in the Via Condotti at number 10 at the heart of Rome, Bulgari became the number one destination for all celebrities of the screen in Rome, and not surprisingly, the synergy with famous, glamorous and beautiful women contributed to expand Bulgari's fame well beyond the confines of Italy. Now, for example, as early as 1949, when Tyrone Power and Linda Christensen got married in Rome in a highly publicized ceremony that year, they chose their wedding bands at Bulgari. And you can see them doing that up on the top. Up there, you can see Tyrone Power and Linda Christensen choosing their wedding bands at Bulgari. But it was during the 1950s, in particular, when countless actresses elected Bulgari as their favorite jeweler. Some even spent their entire first earnings at Bulgari. Now, for example, Anna Magnani was a great Bulgari fan. You can see her here with her cascading ruby and diamond earrings and matching brooches. Magnani, however, is known for playing rather humble characters. Hence, it comes as a surprise to find her passionate in real life for large, glittering jewels, which she wore with great nonchalance. As you can see her here, she wearing on her little finger her 25-carat diamond Bulgari ring. When I had the opportunity to ask her son when his mother began to collect Bulgari, he candidly answered, "When Mummy made money." The beautiful Gina Lollobrigida was another great Bulgari collector at the time, pictured here with her Bulgari necklace set with over 100 carats of diamonds dating to 1954, which doubled as a tiara. Now, what is interesting, she told me that at the beginning of her career, with her first earnings, she managed to buy a very expensive coat. She was so excited by what she then considered an extremely extravagant purchase that she did not sleep all that night. Now, a few years later, when she bought this magnificent Bulgari diamond necklace, in spite of the price, she slept all night long. And ever since, she has been amazed by her surprisingly blasé reaction. This is what she told me. Now, among this host of beauties and celebrities, one cannot, of course, forget to mention Elizabeth Taylor, whose Bulgari collection dramatically increased during the filming of Cleopatra in Rome. But we'll come to that later. It would be impossible for me to show you all the photos of the divas wearing Bulgari, but just to give you a taste of a few, here is Sophia Loren in 1959 in Paris with Maurice Chevalier wearing a very important ruby and diamond necklace. Claudia Cardinale in 1962 with a spectacular 66-carat pear-shaped diamond drop, and Monica Vitti wearing a loaned magnificent emerald and diamond necklace of 1961, which you'll see here in the exhibition. It is set with 7 large Colombian emeralds for a total of over 118 carats of emeralds and 97 carats of diamonds. It is known as Bulgari as the 7 Wonders because it was and still is considered one of the finest jewels ever created. It is fine, of course, exceptional for the quality of its 7 emeralds, perfectly matched in size, shape, and color. It was sold in the 1960s to the wife of a prominent Italian industrialist and recently bought back for the Bulgari Heritage Collection. Now, what you've seen from the Bulgari jewels that I've shown you so far is that they continue to be fairly indebted to the trends of Parisian high jewellery. Fine Parisian jewellery tended to be always mounted in platinum, and the coloured gems were mainly employed individually in association with diamonds and not combined with other coloured gemstones. That is to say that emeralds were mounted with diamonds, and rubies were mounted with diamonds, and so forth. There are, however, some hints of a future trend. And if one looks carefully, for example, at this sapphire and diamond necklace, one can see that it's mounted with cabochon gemstones. That is to say that the sapphires are polished and not faceted, which contributes to convey a sense of roundedness, which is a feature that we'll see will become a characteristic of Bulgari's jewels. Likewise, the bracelets, one of which was made in 1955 and the other in 1959, are formed of a succession of domed elements. And once again, this roundedness becomes a feature in the jewels that we're going to see coming in the following slides. Now, among the most distinctive creations of the 50s and early 60s, still in the vein of Parisian taste, were the floral spray brooches, mainly set with fancy coloured diamonds. They're known as Bulgari as tremblants, and they were greatly favoured by Bulgari's clientele. They were worn as brooches, pinned on the lapel, or in the hair, as you can see here, Ingrid Bergman and the former Empress of Iran, Soraya. Now, the peculiarity of these jewels, as the name suggests, is that their corollas or flower heads are mounted on springs to enable them to quiver at each movement of the wearer. This way of setting was not a novelty at the time in jewellery, as it dates back to the 18th century and in particular to French jewellery. So it goes back a long time. But Bulgari adopted it in the mid-20th century to mount these jewels very successfully. And in particular, they chose these designs of these tremblants because Giorgio Bulgari had acquired a very large parcel of coloured diamonds that had been the personal collection of an Armenian diamond dealer in Paris. So it was a challenge to mount differently shaped and differently coloured gemstones. But how successfully he managed to do so by creating these wonderful quivering floral tremblants. It was, however, from the 1960s onwards that Bulgari began mixing all colours together and using consistently cabochon gems and creating, as you can see here, very compact symmetrical shapes. At first, the combinations tended to be simple, for example, just dark sapphires and pale sapphires, but gradually the combination became bolder until all different coloured gemstones were combined together. Now, another characteristic, as I mentioned, was this idea of compact shapes. Not only colour and cabochon, but compact shapes, a complete departure from the French-style jewellery, for example, from the tremblant, asymmetrical, sort of frilly and lacy. So the Bulgari new style that begins to develop in the 1960s is characterised by colour, compact, rounded shapes. One of the most iconic pieces is a necklace dating to 1965. It is set with very bold color combinations, as you can see here: green emeralds, turquoise, and purple amethyst. What is interesting is that color is used really as if it was just like paint. Bulgari is not concerned with the individual intrinsic value of the gemstones. What counts is the ultimate effect. Here you are mixing very expensive emeralds next to turquoise, which is not so costly, and next to amethyst. It doesn't matter. What counts is the ultimate effect. Notice also the beauty of the back of this piece. The front of the jewel and the back have to be of the equal quality. The back of the jewel, this beautiful finish, which you'll be able to see in the exhibition, also the back, is the finesse of the back is indicative of quality of a piece. So I think that you could even wear this piece back to front. Now, it is not surprising that this piece was immediately bought, and it was bought by an American, Charles Revson, the founder of Revlon, for his very stylish and beautiful wife, Lynn, that you see wearing the piece. Luckily, a few years ago, I managed to buy back this necklace for the Bulgari Vintage Heritage Collection, the retrospective collection of jewels which are not for sale. It featured on the front cover of the first Bulgari major retrospective exhibition of 2009. It was also chosen as the image for an edition of 3.5 million stamps celebrating Bulgari's 105th anniversary, and more recently on a limited edition of San Pellegrino mineral water, as you can see here. Another very iconic piece of this period, which you can see the recurring ingredients of the Bulgari style: color, cabochon, compact shape. It's this magnificent necklace of 1967. Incidentally, one should underline that these are mainly mounted in yellow gold, which is another departure from the French high jewelry style jewels that would tend to be mounted in white precious metal. Now, the sort of timelessness of a beautiful design, I think, is confirmed by the fact that this necklace, made in 1967, was chosen in 2006 by Keira Knightley to be worn on the red carpet of the Academy Awards. And now at Bulgari, ever since, this necklace is known as the Keira Knightley necklace. Now, in the 1970s, the third generation of Bulgari came to take over the leadership of the company after the death of their respective Giorgio Bulgari, who died in 1966, and Costantino in 1973. So it was his sons that took over the Giorgio's sons took over the family business. And here you see them seated in the Via Condotti store. So you can see from the left, Gianni, Paolo, and Nicola. Now, as a result, the jewels are characterized by youthful spirit, with designs drawn from an eclectic range of sources. A great number and variety of suitwires, or long necklaces, were created at this time. This is not surprising, given that the suitwires were particularly suited, due to their elongated shape, to the long lines of the maxi dress. Now, Bulgari's suitwires characteristically feature color and large cabochon stones. For example, the one that you see here has a huge emerald of over 300 carats. Others draw from Oriental sources, such as we have the Buddha sautoir with the figure of Buddha seated in lotus position. There were three variations of this theme were made at this time by Bulgari, and one of them was owned by Lynn Revson, which you see here pictured by and photographed by Richard Avedon. Other sautoirs are encrusted with colourful, precious gemstones. It was during these years that a long-lasting Bulgari motif was devised. It is the so-called Bulgari eye, an oval element with a cabochon gem set off centre. This motif was successfully adopted for sautoirs, as you can see here. They're absolutely covered with Bulgari eyes, you can see all over. You find the Bulgari eye motif featuring on rings, earrings, brooches, bracelets. And it continues to be interpreted in different ways even nowadays. Interestingly, most sautoirs are convertible, as the pendant may be detached and worn separately as a brooch, as you can see here. Others can be divided and the different sections worn separately, sometimes as a shorter necklace or as bracelets. Now, during the 70s, a number of Bulgari jewels are often also very whimsical and witty, as you can see here. At times, they were indebted to concepts introduced by pop art, namely that of elevating items of common day usage to jewels. And here, for example, you find playing cards that become precious jewels. And the one here, just a simple card, becomes a fantastic pendant in gold, mother of pearl and coral. The sautoir is coral, mother of pearl, onyx and diamonds. On other occasions, simple ice cream cone or iced lollies become elevated to the status of a jewel, as you can see here in these brooches. Or other times, a very humble measuring stick may be made in 18-karat gold, as well as a hammer, a fantastic, perfectly working hammer made of 18-karat white and yellow gold, or a cigarette case modelled realistically as a cigarette box. And Bulgari's answer to Andy Warhol's Campbell tin soup, tomato Campbell tin soup, was a wonderful silver and gold tennis ball canister. Among the witty jewels of the 1970s, created by the third young and sort of exuberant Bulgari generation, one finds also the so-called Spangled Banner collection or Stars and Stripes. Now, these jewels and objects, you can see also a wonderful little alarm clock or table clock, quote elements from the American flag. Now, they were introduced at the time of the opening of the first Bulgari store in the United States, which was opened in the Pierre Hotel in 1972. It was not only the first store in the US, but it was the first store of Bulgari abroad since the 1920s. Now, these hip jewels naturally found ongoing favor with the American clientele, and in particular in the years leading up to the celebrations of the American bicentenary of 1976. Now, it was under the third generation also that coin jewels gained momentum. Now, in jewellery, coin jewels are not a novelty. That is to say, when you find a coin as the centerpiece of a jewel. Now, this tradition of jewellery dates back many centuries. And here you see pictured, for example, a late Roman coin jewels that you may see in the British Museum, and a wonderful example of a coin jewel that dates to the late 19th century, 1870s, that was created by the jewelers, a family of jewelers in Rome known as Castellani. Now, this is just to show you that coins have been used in jewellery for many centuries, but it is really Bulgari that revived them in the 20th century. Now, the range of coins used by Bulgari is quite broad. They range from ancient, very ancient coins, as you can see here in the bracelet, with a bronze ancient Greek coin that dates to the 4th century BC, to this wonderful brooch dating to the 1970s, set with a very rare American dollar dating to 1926. So the range is extremely broad. Possibly one of my most favorite in the exhibition is this rather extreme example. It is an incredibly large sautoir. Just to give you an idea, it's 114 centimeters long and it weighs 2 pounds. And it's set with 15 coins, and they're all British coins. Silver British coins with the heads of the sovereigns or heads of state, starting from Henry VIII and finishing with George III. So it's like a sort of history lesson of British history. Now, it was bought by a very extravagant collector for his wife, Baron Ricci de Portanova, a Texan of Italian descent. And you can see here in him and his wife in his very flamboyant house of Acapulco. Now, as all sautoirs, this particular one divides into, as you can see, 3 sections. You can wear it as a shorter necklace, as a choker, or as a bracelet. So one jewel goes a long way. Now, what I think is interesting is always to see the relationship between jewels and other art forms. And for example, here, I think that if one looks and if one questions why were Bulgari's coin jewels so successful at the time, and I think very much they embrace the spirit of the moment. And not surprisingly, the success of coin jewels coincided with the development also of postmodernist architecture. And interestingly, both reference the past in a modern structure in a similar way. And you can appreciate this by comparing this wonderful, sleek, modern cuff bracelet of Bulgari with 3 bronze Roman coins and the very familiar to you, I'm sure, AT&T building by architect Philip Johnson of 1982 in Manhattan, whereby the skyscraper ends with a reference to a classical Greek pediment. So it is this inserting references of the past in very sleek modern settings. Now, the tubo gas, this gas pipe setting, is something that Bulgari did very frequently to mount coins. And here is another wonderful example, a very fine choker mounted with 3 ancient Corinthian Greek coins dating to the 4th century BC, mounted in this very sleek modern setting. And tubo gas, however, is not an invention of Bulgari. It was already used in jewellery as far back as the 19th century, but Bulgari masterfully used it, particularly in association with coins, and we'll see also in wristwatches. How do you make tubo gas? That is the interesting point. Tubo gas is a tubular chain which is made with no solder at all. And here there's some images that you can see, a craftsman. They're entirely made by hand, and you wrap these gold strips that have little ridges at the side, and they're wrapped around a core First one is wrapped round with all the little sides facing upwards, and then the second strip is wrapped around, and finally the core is removed, and what you're left with is this wonderful flexible chain that is made, tubular chain that is made with no solder. So it's a wonderful, beautiful effect, and of course incredibly labor intensive. Another motif that goes back a long way, but which was revived in a very interesting fashion by Bulgari, is the serpent motif. Now, serpents have been used in jewellery since antiquity, and here you can see a set of 3 gold Roman bracelets dating to the 1st century AD. Just to give you an idea of how fashionable they were in antiquity, a wonderful image that you'll find in the Getty Museum. You can see it's a tombstone, and the lady is wearing, I believe, if we can count them, 1, 2, 3, 4 snake bracelets all in one go. So this just gives you an idea that snake bracelets were really no novelty. But Bulgari reinterpreted it, this long-standing motif, in a very successful way. How did they do so? Well, Bulgari combined it with a watch. We find 2 versions of serpent snake watches. The first is stylized, where the dial suggests the head of the serpent. Others are more naturalistically rendered, and the enamel, they're gold and enameled, and you can see each scale is enameled, and the head is concealed, the dial is concealed under the hinged head. Often the enamel, sometimes the enamel is fanciful in color, other times it actually replicates the skin or the livery of real snakes. These are 2 wonderful examples, but in this exhibition you'll be able to see probably some of the rarest Bulgari serpent bracelet watches. One of them here that you can see pictured here is not an enamel, but it's in coral. So you can imagine how labor intensive and how skillful it is to produce all these little scales, all individually carved out of coral. And in this case, it is light, pale pink and red coral, and it has these beautiful green emerald eyes. Another rather exceptional version is gold and platinum and diamond watch, and it is practically identical to the one that Elizabeth Taylor acquired while she was filming Cleopatra in Rome, and you can see Elizabeth Taylor wearing it here on her wrist. So this is Elizabeth Taylor, and this is the one in the present exhibition that you'll be able to see upstairs. And what you can notice is that the body of this one is even grander, it is even better than the one of Elizabeth Taylor, inasmuch as it has an extra coil. And finally, an exceptional piece, another of these wonderful serpent watches. In this instance, it's gold, diamonds, platinum, and you can notice on the head a very large Burmese ruby. I'm showing you here how it would be presented in its original fitted case, and how you can open the head to reveal the dial, in this case, as you can see, surrounded by brilliant cut diamonds. Now, incidentally, the movement of all these watches varies. It was at a time when Bulgari was still not involved in watchmaking, and so the movements tend to be top movements, but they vary. They can be Jaeger-LeCoultre, they can be Piaget or Vacheron Constantin. These are the ones that you find. And it's really, I think, wonderful to be able to see for the first time ever these three exceptional serpent watches, which is really thanks to the generosity of a prominent Californian private collector who has lent them for this occasion for the benefit of all of us to be able to see. Now, moving on in time, in the 1980s were the time when the Bulgari style really came into its own. Gold, clean, rounded shapes, and color. It is no coincidence that Andy Warhol, when interviewing Nicola Bulgari for his Interview magazine in 1980, said, "Well, I think your jewelry is the 80s. Everybody's trying to copy this look." Now, Bulgari's jewels are both bold in dimension and in color combination, but at the same time, they're wearable to cater for the successful working and active woman dressed in the fashionable, structured power suit of the time, which you can see here. Now, it's not surprising that the necklace of this decade hug the neckline, unlike the sautoir. Wearability is a key element of Bulgari of this decade, and it was Nicola Bulgari's belief that the same Bulgari jewel should be wearable for all occasions, for a ball and to a picnic. And when I mentioned this to somebody of the press, they told me, well, I would like to go to those picnics. Now, to this end, Bulgari mixed precious elements with silk cords and also created modular jewelry. Now, the first and extremely successful modular line of jewels is the parenthesis. It consists of interlocking elements which form a pattern of stylized brackets. Parentesi in Italian means brackets. Now, these are all cast and then individually hand finished and assembled. By changing the combination, i.e. mixing, for example, you can mix plain gold with diamonds, as you can see here, or other times you can mix gold with steel, or you can really alter the look of the piece and give birth to an infinite variety of possibility and also price range. So this was a great novelty, was a kind of pret-à-porter in jewelry at the time. There was also a number of superb examples of colorful jewels created in the 1980s, which were, as you know, color is so typical of Bulgari's design, and also cabochon, this roundedness. And for example, here, once again, gems of extremely high value. You see these very large Colombian emeralds are mounted next to amethysts and buff-topped, calibrated rubies. So once again, color, rounded shapes, and mixing gemstones of regardless of their individual intrinsic value. And really, by so doing, Bulgari manages to create sumptuous jewels which are characterized by what I define a casual formality, which in my view is the essence of Italian style at large. Now, finally, I would like to end this talk by showing you the jewels formerly in the collection of Elizabeth Taylor. Now, needless to say, Dame Elizabeth had a passion for acquiring jewels and husbands. Now, the jewels that you will see in the exhibition are mainly the gifts from her fourth husband, Eddie Fisher, who you see here, and fifth and sixth husband, Richard Burton. They were all worn extensively by Elizabeth Taylor, both in real life and on the screen. Now, she acquired from Eddie Fisher 2 tremblants, and the first you see here was mounted in platinum with emeralds and diamonds. The second tremblant, which you'll see in the exhibition, is mounted with colourless and fancy yellow diamonds of different shades. And it was given by Eddie Fisher for her 30th birthday in February 1962. They were part of a set apparently given to Elizabeth in his last attempt in trying to keep his wife from running away with Richard Burton, who she had just met on the sets of Cleopatra. Now, in the exhibition, you will also see a small emerald, or relatively small, 7 carats emerald, which was the first emerald and diamond ring, which was the first jewel she received from Burton. But surprisingly, she never regarded it as an engagement gift. The engagement gift was the spectacular brooch set with an emerald of 23.44 carats in a surround of diamonds. She received it on the sets of Cleopatra later on in 1962. Now, Taylor was so fond of this brooch that she wore it extensively. It appears, for example, here in some scenes of the film VIP. She wore it together with a tremblant in her head, you can see here, as stills for the VIPs, and on her wedding day for her first marriage in 1964 with Richard Burton. As a wedding gift, Burton gave her a spectacular emerald and diamond necklace, to which the brooch can be secured and worn as a centerpiece. Now, it is amazing, Elizabeth Taylor has worn this particular necklace extensively throughout her life, and in particular in many significant occasions. For example, she wore the necklace when she received the Oscar for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. She also wore the necklace when she was introduced to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, and she also wore it in her swimming pool. Now, another spectacular gift which she received from Richard Burton was this wonderful sautoir. She received it in 1972 as a 40th birthday gift. And of course, she received also the matching ring. And I think it is really one of the most spectacular pieces. It is set at the center with a very, very fine Burmese sapphire of 57.5 carats. Notice characteristically Bulgari, it is cabochon. There is this rounded effect. It is unique because, as I mentioned to you, Bulgari tended always to use yellow gold from the 60s onwards for fine jewelry, for high-end jewelry. And this one is probably the only platinum sautoir that I know of. So it is a very rare example and nonetheless very fine jewel. Here we can see her wearing it doubled up around her neck for her 40th birthday. It is a great advantage being a curator of the Bulgari Heritage Collection, because I get the opportunity to examine these wonderful jewels very closely. And I have to confess, sometimes secretly to try them on. Now, the Taylor collection would not be complete without the iconic Bulgari coin jewels. In 1976, on the day she announced her engagement to John Warner, she was wearing this gold Byzantine coin and diamond sautoir. And finally, another interesting piece in the Taylor collection that you will see upstairs, this unusual hand mirror, which is gold and turquoise, which she received as a memento of her filming Cleopatra. And it was made by Bulgari in 1962. However, who was the donor of such a piece intended to pay homage to the modern-day Queen of the Nile remains still a mystery. But I hope we'll meet again, and I will be able to tell you the end of the story once I've been able to do some more research on it. Now, I hope I have been able to illustrate the extraordinary diversity and creativity that characterizes Bulgari's jewels creations from the 1950s until the 1980s. What is clear is that Bulgari has been able to respond time and time again to the changes of time and yet remains true to itself, which I believe is one of the greatest challenges faced by all artists. Now, although the time frame of the exhibition ends in 1990, Bulgari has successfully continued into the 21st century, as you can see by one magnificent creation of 2009, generously lent to this exhibition by another prominent Bulgari Californian collector. Now, its overall design is very different from the bold pieces we saw of the 1980s. But it's still very Bulgari. Look at the striking color combination. Fine deep blue sapphire and orangey red coral. And for the mixing of different levels of value, the very intrinsically costly sapphire at the center and the lesser intrinsically costly coral. The roundedness and the three-dimensional quality. The Bulgari ingredients are all there, but we worked yet again in a creative and inventive way. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Amanda. Thank you very much indeed. Now, do we have any questions in the audience for Amanda after that wonderful, yes. The question is, where is the jewellery made? Is it made in Italy, Amanda?
The majority of the jewels are made in Italy, but as it's true with all jewelers, they tend to be outsourced. If you're we're talking high jewellery. If, for example, you want to create a very fine enamel piece, you will outsource the piece to the best workshop worldwide that is known for enamel, if there's a particular technique involved. So outsourcing to the best workshop. So it depends what you're doing. Then you also have to think when you're dealing with very high level jewelry, that is what we've been looking at, it's very, very labor intensive and time consuming. So often one workshop cannot handle too many pieces because it takes maybe 1,000 working hours to produce just one piece. So you can imagine you can't deal with too many pieces. So that is another reason to distribute the production. And there are very few worldwide, so some maybe in Italy. The majority, however, are in Italy. Bulgari has been associated with a workshop. They have worked sort of in tandem since the 1920s. Bulgari has also its own workshop, and then another working big workshop in the north of Italy, and then other pieces do get outsourced.
Thank you. Yes, the back there, in the middle.
How do you track down pieces?
How, how do you track down pieces for the heritage collection is the
Well,
question.
that keeps me working. That is exactly what I do. I mean, obviously, auction is a very good vehicle, but one would like to find jewels that haven't been published and are unknown. One tries to source them in other ways, or sometimes, of course, private collectors know that Bulgari is buying back. They might come to me, or dealers that deal in this particular type of jewelry would come to me and offer them. But of course, it's very hard because, first of all, fine jewels, I always say jewels come onto the market for the 3Ds or 4Ds. It's death, disease, and divorce. And so, as we're dealing, and I'm looking for particularly representative Bulgari jewels, and as I've been telling you, the distinctive Bulgari style really starts from the end of the 50s. So the people that were wealthy at that time and acquired these pieces are probably still wealthy, still living, and so there is not, unless they're divorcing, there are not a lot of fine Bulgari pieces that I'm looking for on the market. And then, of course, holding an exhibition like this really spoils the market for me, because you all will see, you know, how beautiful and how desirable these type of jewels are. So, you know, it's very hard.
In the middle there, yes.
Would Bulgari ever do like commissions, or is it all their own in-house designs that they?
No, special orders are always done. What is not done is copying vintage pieces. Vintage pieces are not replicated, but you can rework them. You could have a special order, say, I'm particularly fond of that. Could you reinterpret it in a sort of modern, contemporary way? So that definitely is done.
Yes, there, in the middle on the right.
The designs, this change that went for the rounder pebble-shell styles, were any of the family involved literally in the craftsmanship of defining that look, or were there designers that were hired to then realize these ideas?
It's a combination of the two. The designers work under the direction in the past, in the 50s and 60s, it would have been under the direction of Giorgio Bulgari. And nowadays, and more recently, since the third generation has taken over, under the direction in particular of Mr. Paolo Bulgari, who still goes into the office every day, and he will check every step that leads up to the creation of a high jewelry piece. And to the point that if he doesn't approve it, the item cannot leave the office and cannot be photographed. So really, it's very monitored. So it's his input, and then the designers will interpret, and also the workshops will work under very, very specific guidelines. And if they're not right, the piece is not approved, maybe melt it down, they start again.
Well, if that's all the question, no, there are some questions at the back there, yes.
This newer generation seems to be, renters. Is the Bulgari jewelry enhanced by just letting a celebrity wear the piece, or is it better by having someone like Elizabeth Taylor owning the piece?
Well, I think it's definitely better to own the piece. No, I think people I mean, I'm all, of course, for people wearing their own pieces. I think that, for example, on the red carpet, you can see who owns and who has a loaned piece, because one wears one's own pieces with much more conviction. And much more pleasure, you know, you wear your owned piece. So definitely I would say, you know, one should encourage. Unfortunately, one should educate more contemporary stars to, you know, wear and spend their money by investing in jewelry. And what is interesting is that a lot of these stars, like Anna Magnani, for example, and Gina Lollobrigida, they were all buying their own jewelry. They were not waiting for husbands to buy them for them. So I'm sure there are a lot of very wealthy and successful ladies in California that could go shopping. Or maybe even gentlemen, why
Yes.
not? For
In the
themselves.
in the middle, yes.
It's in the making. The shop in number 10 Via dei Condotti is under renovation at the moment, and it's due to reopen with sort of a in February 2014, and it's on that occasion there's going to be a space dedicated for the exhibit the heritage collection. But of course, a lot of it will be here. So it will be a bit bare for the beginning, but
Yes, another question.
I was wondering if you could talk about the perspective from contemporary artists at the time that the jewelry was being created, and I was wondering if you could talk about the role perhaps that jewelry could have in modern or modern design. Is that kind of vague?
it's kind of out of my reach.
Sorry.
Well, I think that though you can bring it back to Andy Warhol, identifying the jewelry in the 1980s as the 1980s and regarding it as a contemporary museum of art. So in that respect, yes, but it is quite difficult otherwise to put it into a contemporary art context because it's not quite on the same agenda.
Yes, I mean, I firmly believe the fact that, for example, jewelry is here at the moment on exhibition endorses the fact that jewelry is art.
Yeah.
So it is a form of art, and what you're looking upstairs is art of a particular time. So jewelry that is produced now, I mean, high-level jewelry that is contemporary art. If that's very much my belief. I don't know if that answered your question, but you were wondering if contemporary artists are involved in the design at Bulgari.
Not necessarily. I think that like throughout my understanding of contemporary art, there's like distinct movements that have a particular agenda, and I was just curious how that played into the construction of jewelry.
Well, definitely. I mean, the jewelry responds
Sorry,
to.
I don't know anything about jewelry.
No, jewelry responds. I think jewelry reflects. I mean, you can look at an Art Deco piece of jewelry and you can look at a skyscraper and they have the same lines. So obviously, the jeweler creating the bracelet or whatever it is, a pair of earrings in the 1930s, was inspired by the same ideas that led the architect to design. So I mean, I think everything is linked. In fact, you can date a piece of furniture, you can date a building, you can date a painting because they are of a given time. And that is very clear. Unfortunately, with jewelry, one tends, I mean, as a, let's say, a lay person, the first thing that one is concerned about is the carats. It's the intrinsic value. I think that one has to go beyond that because what counts is the artistic merit, the artistic value, the fact that jewelry is also intrinsically precious, unlike, for example, a painting that is just on canvas, is an added plus, not a minus. and they all are part of their, of the, you know, they reflect the time in which they were created.
Yes.
I wanted to mention, in answer to this last question, the architect that did the Guggenheim Museum is now designing jewelry.
This is a mention from the audience that the architect who did the Guggenheim, Frank Gehry, you mean, is designing jewelry. So there is, yes, there are manifestations that link up in contemporary art. Well, thank you very much indeed for your attention, and thank you so much, Amanda. It really was a fantastic lecture.